Welcome to Driving Alpha, where we feature our friends, the outperforming investors who demonstrate their path to driving alpha or outsized investment returns. We're Alpha Partners, where we partner with 1,000 early-stage venture firms as their opportunity capital to invest in their best companies. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.
Hi, I'm Steve Brotman, your host for today's podcast on Driving Alpha. Driving Alpha is a podcast inspired by our venture fund's efforts to connect with VCs. And one of those things was driving exotic cars. A few years back, every year we'd host 12 VCs on the back roads of New Jersey. And, we've got to drive Lambos and Porsches and all sorts of crazy stuff. But, certainly some of the partners could afford their own. But the highlight of those trips, though, was really just the conversations, because what would happen is we would switch drivers every 30 minutes or so. One person driving a car, another person sitting in the passenger seat. And what we really took away was not just the cars and the beautiful weather, but our connections with other people in the industry. And we wanted to kind of recreate that a little bit with Driving Alpha. So today we have Rebecca Kaden. She's a managing partner at USV. She began her career as a journalist. Prior to USV, was a general partner at Mavron, a consumer-focused early-stage fund. She was born in New York City, studied English and American Lit at Harvard, and received her MBA at Stanford. But she's done many, many other things since. And now at USV for 6 years now, 7 years?
Yep.
7 years now. So welcome to the pod, Rebecca. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. Our team was super excited to have you on. We've heard so much from other VCs in the community about your dynamism and perspective. So super excited to hear more. Why don't you share a little bit? I mean, I gave a very dry bio there. Why don't you share a little bit more about, how you came to be at USV, in your own words.
Sure.
And that would be a great place to start. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I grew up here in New York City, but made my way to the Bay Area after I had graduated from college. And I was a journalist. I was an editor at the time and thought that's really what I wanted to do and really enjoyed it, but made my way to business school, kind of humbled and curious about the publishing industry and what was going on with editorial, but quickly got kind of sucked into everything that was going on in that era in Silicon Valley and became very close to a mentor of mine at business school at Stanford named Bill Campbell, who you may have known, but was known in the Valley as the coach. He passed away a number of years ago, but he had actually started his career as the football coach of Columbia. And in this kind of winding, amazing path, became the chairman of Intuit. He had ran Adobe. He had this kind of storied tech career, but largely as an advisor. He was kind of most known as being a really good coach and kind of wisdom giver to big names, mostly Eric Schmidt and Steve Jobs, and kind of as big as you can get. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, was involved at GSB and very good about getting to know students there. And I had gotten to know him well and had gone to him to talk through some ideas I had about what I would do after going to business school, having come from kind of unusual path. And he was the first one to say to me, I think you should explore being a VC, that your kind of curiosities and interest in people and ideas might be a good fit. Maybe it'll work out. At the very least, you'll learn a lot about different early stage companies and get your feet wet and, jump into a business.
And when was this in your career? When you were
2010. And he introduced me to Mavron, where he was an advisor. And Dan Levitan took a big bet on me there, hired me as originally an intern. I worked up the ranks of Mavron. So I did that whole kind of run up there as associate and principal and partner and a general partner, and learned a ton. Mavron's a very consumer focused firm, and then joined the partnership at USV in 2017, which, among other great things, brought me back to New York City.
Now, before you went back to business school, you were a journalist, right?
Yeah, I had spent some time. Ever since in high school, I thought I would be a journalist. I really loved it. I loved writing. I loved the process of getting to know sources. So I had spent some time in magazines and newspapers, and then as a literary editor, and kind of exploring the world of publishing and journalism, and really liked it, but was also pretty aware of the limitations and the kind of evolution of it was having in the world, and thought I needed to kind of branch out.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fred's old partner, Jerry Colonna, was a journalist. And there's quite a few journalists who turned out to become great VCs.
Well, mostly Mike Moritz, right? It's
Mike
always
Moritz.
whenever journalism comes up, you say, like, thank God for Mike Moritz. Because now when you say it, people are like, oh, like Mike Moritz. And you're like, exactly like Mike Moritz.
Well, there's a good number of others as well. But yeah, no, I'd say I'm thinking about someone who's drawn a blank, and it'll probably come to me in a few seconds. But
there's a bunch. Yeah,
it's there's definitely a good number. You know, has that training translated into venture? You know,
I always say that there are definitely. I'm a big believer in general on liberal arts education and the power of writing and thinking. And it's very aligned with USV, right? A USV philosophy is that generalist investing is the repeatable action of going from kind of intrigue or curiosity about something to perspective on it over and over again. And what you're doing that around is going to change as the world changes. But that process of repeatable learning is the core of what we do. And that is journalism, right? Like the idea of becoming interested in something and pulling that thread and figuring out that story, often with, fewer data points than you might like and probably more than you would need, actually has a lot of similarities. And we really value the ability to express that often in writing. So I do think there are similarities. The output, the risk tolerance, a lot of things are quite different about it, but there's something fundamentally similar.
Yeah, journalists can be a little more passive, but you are taking some risks out there and just inquiring about someone, beyond, more the details of how they're thinking, and interviewing lots and lots of people, customers, consumers, recruiting, all that stuff. It comes out of that. But yeah, you're right about that. That's pretty cool. Well, I think I think you came well prepared. It's not common that you just get plucked out of a class by Bill Campbell. He's a pretty famous guy. I think I read his book. He wrote a book, called The Coach, which was excellent.
Yeah.
How's it, in terms of what you brought to USV? I don't want to. Why don't you share sort of the development of USV, how that's, how that dynamic has changed or stayed the same over the last, decade or half decade?
So USV started in kind of early 90s by Fred Wilson and Brad Burnham, two of my partners, really as a small thesis-based generalist firm. So the idea is we aren't kind of sector or category specific, but we are very thesis-driven, which means we're not going to be totally opportunistic. We're not just going to see what the market's kind of delivering. We're going to spend a lot of time thinking about hypotheses and ideas and where there's the most kind of interesting opportunity in markets and what specifically we believe will drive that opportunity, and then investing behind it. So I think of it as kind of low velocity, high conviction investing. Each partner is leading a relatively small number of investments every year and spending quite a bit of time on each of them. That fundamental model has not changed about USV at all. And I actually believe I can say with quite a bit of confidence is never going to change about USV. There's a lot of things we're religious about. A small fund size, a thesis-driven approach, pacing, fund construction, a very collaborative kind of thought-based model, public thinking, a lot of things like that. What that thesis is and where we choose to kind of point the energy does evolve over time. So we've published really 4 horizontal theses over the history of USV, starting with thesis 1.0, which really was about network effects, large networks of engaged users creating outsized value. And it's evolved, but what we always say is that USV, one of my partners, Andy, always calls it USV is an ongoing conversation, that it has no kind of distinct errors. It's not one thesis after another. It's an evolution that kind of continually evolves, and people come into the conversation and out of the conversation, but we're always kind of pushing it forward. And that's been very steady. So right now, we remain a small set of general partners. We run this equal model. We have a very collaborative approach. And we're really interested right now in where are there markets that we believe are structurally in moments of transition, that they're shifting, and how can we approach them from what we call the edge, which is really the outside in, and come at them in new ways that we believe push those markets forward. We think that the world's in a really interesting time. Kind of fundamental institutions that in some ways we've taken for granted are actually moving around and changing. If you think about the energy transformation or education or healthcare, but the most interesting ways to transform them versus kind of incrementally improve them are not going to be to go through the middle and the traditional paths, but to be a new way to come at them, whether that's direct to learner and education or new forms of retail energy or different modes of connecting patients directly to care or whatever it is. And so we really think about that across sectors.
Right. No, I mean, you guys, I mean, I think you put your, you've touched on something there in terms of, is the kernel of network effects still there? I mean, is it something that you persistently consider in your thesis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because oftentimes the most interesting way to help shift a market from the edge is through a network-driven model and thinking about network effects, right? Because that bottom-up growth and approach is often the counter to through the middle, right? Which is the China traditional path. And so it's something we're really interested in, particularly because as a small fund, we're interested in how moderate amounts of capital can grow very large value. We're less well-positioned and less interested in how huge amounts of capital can grow a lot of value. There are plenty of examples where that's necessary and the case, and firms set up well to do that, but it's not really our focus. And so leveraged models of growth like network effects fit very well into that model.
Right. So we're actually co-investors just by chance in well, not exactly by chance. We talked to you about Brave Health before we invested, and we're also by chance with 30 Madison, as 30 Madison merged with one of your portfolio companies.
Well, 30 Madison is actually a funny story because I led the 30 Madison seed at Maveron and then left and joined USV, and USV were investors in Nurex, and the companies merged. So I'm a big 30 Madison fan and have gotten to see a big kind of evolution of that business.
Well, it's just massive opportunity, massive segments that both companies are. And you led the Brave investment, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so that's it's, you know, that sector is 25% of GDP, the healthcare sector.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about healthcare specifically those companies or in general?
Yeah. Talk about those. So those are good examples of the thesis and teams that we really believe in and are excited in. So in healthcare, we're interested in how the market can evolve to better serve patients, improve outcomes, and lower costs. Very structurally difficult in healthcare to do that because of how fundamentally it's set up. But all of our investing is really designed around how you can look at it in kind of new ways to do that. And there's a couple of buckets. One is more direct access to patients. 30 Madison, right, obviously falls into that bucket. It's really a direct-to-patient model of care delivery. Another is making care more accessible and easier to pay for patients. That's really Brave, right? We spent a lot of time looking at mental health in particular, just because of the acuity of the need, the challenges in that market, frankly, how big it's getting, which is unfortunate to say, but the desperate need for more care solutions and how hard it was to find the care and to pay for it. And that bucket of access to care, getting it online and making it easier to pay for, Brave and many others are creating a market that is frankly, I think, much larger than anyone probably believed when that kind of group of investments was happening. But Brave is really focused on the highest need patients and the hardest to pay, right? Medicare and Medicaid. And that has been very challenging for a whole host of reasons. But by going at the hardest part of the market and cracking it through very, very good execution, you unlock a huge amount of capital because frankly, that's where the payers are the most concerned because that's their highest cost patient. And also where the need is the greatest and the outcomes can really matter. And so we were very excited to invest in that. It was very thesis aligned and also we felt like really, really mattered. But there's other pieces of healthcare that we've also been excited about that we think can change the fundamental model. If you think about a Bridge, which is another investment of ours, Bridge is a medical scribe as its kind of core foundational piece, but it's becoming a lot more than that because it's creating really a direct link between the patient and the provider. And it's also really allowing the provider to introduce a huge amount of efficiency to what they're doing by recording those visits and automating the notes and integrating directly with the systems. It makes what they do way more efficient and also adds a lot of value to patients. And that business, when we got involved, probably 16, 17, before the AI craze, and it was really starting with a bottom-up mechanic of going directly to those providers and those patients and seeing that kind of value emerge. And then it leveraged that bottom-up growth to then go over the top and do that integration with Epic and sell into the larger systems. And that's a mechanic we really, really like. And so if you look at those three healthcare investments, they map out three different ways to approach healthcare from the edge and push it forward, using kind of new channels and creating new access to care.
That's pretty cool. We actually invested in Rad AI, which is a subsegment of Bridge's market. But it's my dad was a radiologist, so I remember him recording his interpretations of film, and to sort of see all that being released is just amazing. And cool. What can be done with all that data, it's just it is so cool. It is just so cool. We're fortunate to be a part of that as well, that whole genre. But you've also done a few deals, Stash, Ghost, Team Shares, Carbon Chain. You've done a few more as well. You want to share more about some of those and how those came to be?
Sure, I can kind of go at random. But we like those are actually an interesting group because they all fit things that we really like. If you take Ghost is a business with a lot of momentum right now that we're really excited about. But Ghost is a B2B marketplace for excess inventory. So it connects buyers and sellers of excess inventory. Very broad definition of what that inventory might be. High-end fashion, sneakers, appliances, doesn't really matter what it is, but there's a huge amount of excess inventory in the world. And traditionally, it's been a broker-driven business owned by a very small group of players on the buy side. By releasing that and unleashing a much broader set of buyers, you do a bunch of things. One, tech in this market has largely been insights and analytics driven. And we're really interested in where are there markets where the innovation has been around insights and analytics, but could be made transactional. And by connecting that supply and demand, you can not only give them that insights and analytics, but also unleash new business and new opportunity and new growth. And this was a really directly up the middle example of that. It was an industry that was seeing dramatic growth already and was looking for kind of more direct mechanics to put that together. And that's really what they've seen. But the most interesting part of Ghost is what you see is when you can create these marketplaces at their best, they also create business opportunities you didn't even foresee when you put that together. So the original buyers for Ghost, right, were the traditional set of excess inventory buyers. The surplus retailers, the offline stores that sell excess, all those kind of traditional set. What they found is that by making it easier to buy this merchandise, the whole set of TikTok resellers, Amazon resellers, whatnot resellers, they were able to fuel and create a business for them that otherwise they didn't have. And so they were kind of industry making in that way. And so that's really exciting and very aligned with what we look for. Team Shares is another great example. Team Shares is a platform that buys the long tail of small businesses in America and transitions them to employee ownership. So this is an example where we really like unusual, odd markets that can enable a very new behavior that are kind of category creating versus incrementally improving. Lots and lots of small businesses in America, 3 million plus. Previous generations, they would have been given to the next generation, the kids of the owners of the business. That's kind of how many of these have always worked. And they're important. They're the backbone of the economy all across this country. You don't want to get rid of them. You don't want it all to aggregate to the large platforms. You want this small economy to really thrive. But in this generation, the kids don't want the businesses. So many of them die. But oftentimes, the best owner for those businesses are the employees. But facilitating that transition and that transaction is very, very difficult to do. So by creating a platform that enables that, you empower this generation of employees, you allow these businesses to continue, you actually allow them to thrive because you can give them a lot of resources, you aggregate on the back end banking and accounting and insurance services that are very helpful for them, and also create a great business because you get the benefit of this portfolio, but also you're building a really interesting horizontal fintech platform on the back of it. So that is a company we absolutely love. We got involved at the seed and have really seen it grow to a quite impressive scale. It is hard to do. It is unusual. It doesn't really fit in a box. It's not a productivity SaaS tool, and so being open to things that are a bit odd and come at it in a different way, we think kind of unleashes a lot of opportunity.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I was just thinking about the trend. I just read somewhere that, like, I want to say $16 trillion of small businesses is going to transition over the next,
it's really wild.
Some stupid number. Whenever I hear the number T, or the letter T, regarding a company, I definitely, and team sharing, I guess, would qualify then. But that's pretty cool. I didn't even know that backstory there. Could you share an example of a company or an entrepreneur where you backed, where you saw potential where others might have overlooked? And maybe that's every company you do. What was it about that company or entrepreneur that caught your eye?
Yeah, we tend to like the unusual. So I would say, definitely there are times we go at competitive investments and we fight for them and we chase them. And, that is a core part of this business and you have to be great at it. And I kind of like it when that happens because it's kind of fun.
Right.
But a disproportionate, I think, number of investments for us are not like that. They're a little bit unusual. They're a little bit quirkier. And we think we can do that because of the thesis-driven approach, where when we come to it, we have an informed perspective and we say, it really matches something we're looking for. One example might be Journey Clinical. This is another B2B marketplace in healthcare that we're really excited about. It's enabling access to the existing infrastructure of the mental health market to leverage new modalities of care, starting with psychedelics. And so right now it's focused on ketamine. In the future, as they become regulated, there'll be a lot more. We had a very, very strong thesis around psychedelics. When you look at back to that access to care thesis that we were talking about with Brave and some of the other businesses, you look at that and you say mental health needs to be transformed. It's woefully inadequate on how we're treating patients. We need access to care, meaning it needs to be brought online and made easier to pay for. But we also need to push forward what care itself needs. And that if we only do the first and we don't do the second, there are whole swaths of patients that we're not going to be able to treat. And as we dug into that, you very quickly get to psychedelics because you learn that since SSRIs, there's been very, very little innovation in what care itself can mean. And psychedelics, ketamine's been regulated for now a bunch of decades in different ways. It's definitely the best shot at this. So we got very interested in this and we're really honing a thesis on what we were looking for. And what we came to was we didn't want it to be direct to patient. We wanted to leverage the existing infrastructure of the industry to deliver new modalities because you need to combine the access to this treatment with trust and delivery. and it being kind of in the right package and in the right hands. And that is basically exactly what Journey Clinical was doing, and really only Journey Clinical was doing. So a lot of people, when they came to, were like, psychedelics, that sounds like drugs and scary, and I don't know. And we had done a bunch of work on the thesis that gave us a primary in mind. And so we were able to move quite quickly and get comfortable with that investment. And since have doubled down, and they've performed super well in that market. So that's one example there.
Oh, that's great. I've, as an old school VC, sort of psychedelics and military hardware, there are different elements that can be contrarian to the whole, VC outlook. But it sounds like you're open. What percentage do you think are sort of what you would call sort of non-competitive outliers in the portfolio, that where you're not in sort of a mono fight with other VCs?
Good question. And it seems to vary kind of thesis to thesis and a little bit market to market, but probably 70%.
Wow. That's pretty big. And no wonder you're so successful. Because I think it's important to be contrarian.
If you're going to go out on a limb, though, you have to be right.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Don't screw it up,
Yeah.
But given the track record that you guys have amassed, you often are right. Diving a little bit deeper into that sort of entrepreneur VC relationship, what do you think the most crucial role for a VC is to play in supporting founders, just beyond obviously providing capital?
I think this varies a lot. And one of the things I love about USV and our approach is because we're this kind of low velocity, high conviction, limited pacing approach, we can tailor what we do to each company. We don't need a playbook, and we don't need a kind of one size fits all approach. We can see what comes up. There's repeat things, right? Like I would say very often we help a lot with hiring and team building, right? We leverage our networks. We leverage our patterns around what makes great CXO or VPX or whatever it is, and try to help on the team building front.
So you don't have a platform team that does that. You guys do that as part.
We have a network team. We have a fantastic head of talent who helps us, but we're each very involved in those. And we screen, we close, we source, we do those things alongside our team with for the companies, and that's a kind of big role. Oftentimes, some founders really like, and we really like, a product strategy, right? And sometimes that really is helpful for that company at that moment. And because we've been thesis driven, we can kind of bring that. Other times, they don't want you near that, right? And you invest in them because they're best in class at product strategy, and they really want you to direct your energy towards something else. And so we can respect that too. So I think my takeaway is you need to be a generalist in how you can help. You need to be flexible in what that means. You need to be there for the ride and in it and willing to do the work. You need to tell the hard truths and leverage the access you have to looking horizontally while they're looking vertically. But you also have to be very aware on what you don't know. I think we've all seen examples where the board member, the person around the table, feels like they're expected to have an answer to every question and to know everything. And that's not productive. And so being able to read where the needs of that company intersect with the skills we can bring and hone that in pretty quickly in each example is, I think, part of the core job. And, also knowing when to back off.
Right. You pointed to something kind of interesting, which I haven't heard in a while, which is low velocity. And it sort of comes and goes, but, in 20 and 21, it looks like you're a little more, how do you see that velocity? Like, is it 4 deals a year? Is it 6 deals a year? What was it more?
1 to 3 investments per partner per year.
1 to 3.
3 would be on the high end. 1 is, fine.
Probably more normal, right?
Yeah.
So that's
the average is to 2 a person a year. There are definitely years where people don't make an investment. Totally fine.
So, right.
So we just, we try to take our time. We're not believers, and including when new things come to market, when there are new trends in the market, we have have a deep appreciation that the winners often aren't the first to emerge. And we want a very thoughtful perspective on what we are looking for when we go after something. And if that means letting things go while we develop that thesis, our whole model of a small fund is based on the ability to do that, right? We manage relatively small funds, particularly compared to some of our peers in the market. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons to do that is that we can take a true bottom-up approach, right? We don't have to look at the market and say there are going to be X number of billion-dollar companies created this year. We need to be in Y% or the model doesn't work. There can be a lot of great companies that we're not investors in, as long as we're right enough about enough of the things we do. And so we really like that. It's about what we do and not about what we don't do. Now, we want to see the best companies in our thesis areas. We want to be very hungry for it. We want to have that coverage, but we're okay letting things go by while we develop the kind of tip of the spear and sharpest thesis so that we can approach things in the way we want to.
Would you be willing to elaborate a little bit in terms of, is there a sector today that would fit that dynamic?
I mean, AI is obviously the obvious one, right? Where we have quite a number of companies that would fall into an AI portfolio, though we've stopped organizing it that way. We believe pretty quickly AI is becoming an ingredient across the board, and so we've stopped kind of verticalizing it. We also are believers that our portfolio should be designed around solving core needs, right? And what the outcome is of the company in its kind of best state. And technology is a tool set for getting there, but it is not, you never see technology in our thesis. Our thesis is not about using AI or software or anything else or crypto. Those become critical tool sets in accomplishing the theses we talk about, but what those tool sets are will evolve. And so we try to really keep that in mind. So we're very interested in the application layer of AI and what new behaviors that will allow for that really push past just kind of efficiency and into the magic territory.
So traditional low capex application centric.
We're excited about
to solve that problem.
Yeah, right? We're excited about it. We haven't seen them all yet. And we think sometimes that takes, some time to evolve. So I don't know. One of the things I find most interesting about venture is this inherent tension between patience and impatience, right? Where you have to be impatient. This is about capturing the new and running fast after it and being on the edge of the most interesting things. But it also requires this immense amount of patience, both to really align with the right company around what you're looking for, and then to be patient with it, as it grows. And you want that company to feel that impatience where they want to overperform every quarter, but also the patience in that things take time. And so I really like that tension. I find it hard, but it's something I really like about venture.
Right. I mean, at one point you guys did focus a lot on blockchain.
Still do.
Okay. It definitely feels like a contrarian bet almost, except when things are just going berserk. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more about that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, crypto is it's about 20% of our funds and has been for the last almost 10 years. It's very steady in that way. We're huge believers. One, when you're at USV, it's a little bit hard to argue with results, and that crypto has been a really, really good sector for USV and produced really exciting results for us. But also that's come from not an effort to chase speculation or to be in it when the market's hot, but a really, really kind of baseline thesis approach around decentralization. Right. And the belief that the internet is centralizing and that markets are aggregating and that's a problem. It's a problem for innovation. It locks it up. It makes it harder to do. It's a problem for users and for privacy and what's happening to data. And that the best solve right now for a bunch of those problems is a decentralized ecosystem. And we're interested in both the infrastructure and the applications that allow for that. Right now, we actually announced an investment today called Sling Money, which is a cross-border peer-to-peer payments app under the hood built on stable coins. And in that, we wrote, to a user, it feels like magic, and it doesn't matter that it's built on stable coins. What matters is that it's the fastest way to send money cross borders, that you can search by people's names. You don't have to remember users' names, that it happens instantaneously, and that it's almost free. Why that's possible is through stable coins and because it's built on the blockchain. But increasingly, that's going to be the dynamic of the best applications here, where crypto is a superpower to unlock a core user behavior versus the headline. It's the how and not the why. And we see that, in Sling, we see that in Blackbird and the loyalty system for restaurants that it's unlocking. And we think we're entering a time where we're going to see that more. And that's really exciting.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. Has that been publicly announced?
Yeah, we announced it this morning.
Great. Super, just making sure. Going back to something you said earlier in our conversation is that, Bill Campbell was an early influence and suggested you go into venture. In terms of mentoring is a big part of the venture industry. It's it's a cottage industry, and there's a lot of apprenticeship work that's done. Could you share some of the things that Campbell might have shared with you that impacted you, that he suggested, or other mentors in venture that
yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I feel like I have so many awesome mentors in venture, both kind of explicitly, but also who I've been lucky enough to see on a board and watch how they work. And just there's so many opportunities for learning broadly in this, which I just think is such an awesome thing. I mean, the biggest ones for me are my partners, right? Because I get to see them all the time. And, I always say that the biggest blessing to me is that I work with these fantastic investors and I get to learn, not from all of their great things they've done, of which there are many, and I learn from, but mostly from their mistakes. And they're so willing to be the first one to tell you all the ways they, messed up before that, hopefully can be shortcuts for me. And so that is, I think, I am a huge believer that venture can be a really, really great apprenticeship business, and that working for people that have done it and seen it and can teach you really, really can go a long way. It's not the only way to do it. We can all point to many other examples, but it's one that I really enjoy and I think is effective. So my partners are high on the list. Bill Campbell, he really was the master of tell it to you straight, but with a big heart. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot. That's a real USV thing as well, where we don't believe our role on boards are just cheerleaders. We think you have to cheerlead CEOs and founders, that's important, that's super hard and super lonely, and you need to be there for them, pick them up. But that if that's all you're doing, you're not doing your job, and that we also serve the company. And so figuring out the balance of how to lead with empathy and have that big heart and really sympathize with where they are and how hard it is, but also be willing to have the hard conversations and push and say the hard truths. And, I think Fred or Albert are about as good as that you get. But Bill Campbell was really, really good at that, and not in a VC capacity, but in his capacity as a coach. And so I admire that. And I think about it all the time, and definitely try to take pieces of that and make it, my own.
Does USVP, is it, do you see you guys being mostly a lone wolf venture firm, or you collaborate a lot with other VCs?
We collaborate a lot with each other. Our deal processes and our kind of thinking, thesis, investment processes is super collaborative internally. We're very, very of individual driven, but we also collaborate a lot with other firms. We're actually huge believers in the syndicate. We always have been. There have been many, many examples, including in some great outcomes where we could have kind of guided more of the deal and taken more of the pie, but instead chose to work with other firms, or also where they've chosen to work with us. And that's been to the benefit of us and the company and the outcome. We're just believers that these are never straight lines. And that it's a myth that, a company works and it just scales. That none of the great stories actually look like that. There are so many hiccups along the way, and having the right combination of aligned thinkers around the table to support in that really does matter. So we work collaboratively a lot and value it.
What would you say, like if you're talking to a junior VC, and we have a lot of junior VCs on our team, you talked to one earlier before we started. Would you have any sort of touchstones that you think about a lot? You mentioned one earlier in terms of having the big heart and talking about it straight. That is great. Any other touchstones that you would point to?
I mean, there are a lot. I think be comfortable going slow. I think there's an impetus sometimes when you're getting into VC and building your career to think about the goal is getting the deal done. I always think like as soon as you write the check, you're in the red, right? And then your goal is to, not only get in the green, but really get in the green. And so go slow, be patient on the deal side. Take the time to learn and to gain perspective and think about the objective as working with great companies versus getting deals done. Very hard to do because we all feel impatient to kind of get moving, but try to find ways to do that. I think spend a lot of time in early days thinking about what it means for you to help. That it's very trite. It's become a little cliche to talk about, VCs helping. So think about where your center of gravity is there. Are you a great recruiter? Are you a great closer? Are you great at, helping raise money? Are you like, what is the thing that can kind of kickstart you and that you can kind of gain some comfort ground in? And similarly, I'm a big proponent of, even if you're a generalist, pulling some threads, picking some areas where you can have deep perspective and come to a conversation and not just say, pitch me a company, but let's have a conversation around alignment around ideas. It's a very different dynamic with a founder to do those things. And I think you learn a lot from it. And it also gives you confidence early in kind of honing what does it mean to feel conviction and how do I know what I'm looking for? So those are some things I think about when I talk to junior VCs.
Oh, that's great. Rebecca, this has been an awesome chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. A lot to think about, a lot to chew on, and appreciate you joining us today. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca.
Thanks for listening to the Driving Alpha podcast, where we host top investors to demonstrate how they outperform the market. Click subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.